Welcome to everyone in the room and welcome to everyone on the stream to this event, this discussion on a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. And those of you who are here, you probably know that this has been something that's been debated for over 60 years. And some time ago, in 1995, there was a review and extension conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and then several states successfully negotiated this Middle Eastern peace conference into this document with a view of getting towards a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. Then there was 2019, again, a little something happening at the United Nations. So some kind of a forum was created to debate this issue further. It obviously is a very important issue, yeah. So in Vienna, we've had quite a few rounds of the Iranian nuclear talks, and so that is something that in the city was always featuring quite prominently. There's of course also the problem of nuclear capabilities on the Israeli side and everything, and on top of it, it is of course a very volatile world region. And so I'm very happy that we have a group of scholars slash activists here with us. And they came on the occasion of the first meeting of the parties of the Nuclear Prohibition Treaty here in Vienna. You're both coming now from this first meeting of the parties. So first of all, how was it? And second, was there anything in there about the nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East, implicitly, explicitly? Whoever wants to go first. At the TPNW, yes.
I have to be very honest. We're activists. It means that when we go to an event like this, what happens in the main room, we mainly know afterwards when we read all the reports. Because as activists, what we're doing when we're coming to this kind of events is to actually make use of the fact that governments are there. The meeting itself was a success. I mean, there were about 80 states in the room. I think you can tell us more a bit what happened there. And Dr. Leo Bandara, that was the author of the fourth draft treaty, were in the room, and maybe they're better to answer what was in the room. The Middle East is being discussed, but in a very now low and kind way. What we are worrying about is the next meeting that is coming, the NPT, because of the difference between these two treaties, and because of the 95 resolution of the NPT that we will discuss soon.
I mean, first of all, it was the first one, am I right? It's the first meeting of the state parties to the Nuclear Ban Treaty, or the TPNW. And the fact that we are already having it is a miracle in itself. Secondly, there was two groups of states. These are the states that have signed and ratified the treaty, and those who came as observer status. Now, those observer states are a little bit problematic. I mean, these are the countries such as Germany, we had Holland, and a few other characters that came. And it's problematic because in their territories, they host NATO's nuclear weapons. So that's why they have actually a little bit of an uncomfortable situation. Domestically, and based on their usual policy, they're against nuclear weapons, but they're dealing with NATO and the nuclear weapons umbrella that they've agreed with the Americans. So being in the room is welcoming, but if you read their statements, which I'm sure is going to become public very quickly, you see that they don't know what to do at the moment. They want to be assertive that TPNW may not be the most effective way forward, and at the same time, they know that they got to do something about this armament. So, in a sense, there was a unity amongst those states in the room that are party and have ratified the treaty. And I thought it was a fantastic environment. We were amongst friends. That's not usually the case when we are in the other major nuclear non-proliferation treaty review conferences or so forth in New York, where we have nuclear weapon states present. So that's been a welcoming, refreshing sort of reality. Finally, in terms of our work, when it comes to the WMD-free zone in the Middle East, a narrower version of that is the nuclear weapons-free zones. Now, that has always been welcomed, and the TPNW complements and expands on such initiatives that have established such regional approaches to disarmament. And therefore, many countries there actually fall under some form of nuclear weapons-free zone areas around the world. And that is every country in the southern hemisphere, plus a few more specific areas like, Kazakhstan and Mongolia. So we actually have a very fun time. But our advocacy and activism work is usually not in the room, not in the big hall, because they're sitting there making their statements, and it's very boring. We catch them outside. Because everybody needs coffee in these conferences, and that's where we get them, we get our message across, and we make sure that then that new ideas are then spread throughout these countries so that they will assist us, as Sharon said, in our next step, which is NPT in New York.
I'm glad about the optimism, because there's no longer that much optimism about the nuclear weapons regime. But
I really do hope that by the end of this,
you will be hopeful.
everybody will be a tiny bit more optimistic. Really,
yeah, that's good.
We're hoping. That's what we came to do.
That's good. A difficult question. Maybe I'm going to start with you, Sharon, but then I'm going to move to you, Emad, as well. Could we think of something like a roadmap towards a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East?
So it's by far more than just a roadmap to a weapon of mass destruction-free zone in the Middle East, because, but first, of course, yes. I mean, or else what are we doing? Of course. The thing is that you cannot detach the Middle East from the rest of the world, because even though people really talk about the Middle East as if it has kind of a dome around it, the Middle East doesn't have any borders. It's not even on a continent. The Middle East is an invention, right? It's a Western invention. It's not real. We are using a Western invention in order to achieve something, but we have to realize that you cannot disarm one part of the world, especially that this part of the world have been and is continuing to be exploited by the superpowers, by those who sell weapons. Israel is one of them, but yet the world is not stopping interfering with the Middle East, so you can't do anything in the Middle East without doing something global. And it's not just that. I mean, we're working directly at the weapon of mass destruction-free zone in the Middle East, not because we think that that's what the Middle East needs, but because we think that that's what one of the nuclear-armed states, one of the 9 nuclear-armed states needs in order to come to the table. What bothers us, or what we want to see, is a world without nuclear weapons. I'm not sure how much the people here in the room or the people that are watching us are aware of the nuclear winter, what happens if there's a nuclear war. And I'm not just talking about a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, talking about, between Russia and the US, with hundreds of bombs. In 2008, a new research started to be published about what happened if there's only a tiny nuclear war between India and Pakistan. What if they're using just small bombs the size of the bomb on Hiroshima, when the vast majority of bombs today are by far bigger? What is it if a tiny limited war between India and Pakistan? And what this result showed was that just because of the soot, a city that burns, if there's a usage of 50 to 100 small bombs, what you will experience is in 2 days, 70% less sunlight. I'm not talking about the people that will die from the bombs themselves, and we're talking millions. I'm not talking about the radiation that will spread all over Earth and will change us forever. It will change everything forever, right? Everything will change a little bit. I'm talking about just the results of the soot going into the stratosphere, staying there for about 10 years. 2 years of 70% sunlight means world starvation. Now, we see climate change crawling slowly. We see what happens when there are already wars over resources. We see what happens when there's not enough water, when there's not enough food, and how people are being misplaced. Imagine that in 2 days, there's so less sunlight that those states that feed the rest of the world with soya, corn, maize, wheat and rice suddenly can hardly feed their own people, let alone send food or sell food to other states. We're talking about 2 billion deaths in 2 years, not from wars, just from starvation and from the sickness that come from starvation. And we don't know how many more people will die because of wars over resources. So when you understand that, you understand that you're not going to just disarm one state. There are 9 nuclear states that hold everybody hostage. And we need to find solutions to all of them. We're here to find solution to one state to join the table, but this is not enough. We're doing it knowing that we have to find solutions to all of the rest of the 8, and that's what we're doing. We started with the Middle East, but we started with the Middle East because, and that might sound harsh, because people from the Middle East, by the rest of the world, seem like the people that can only talk or solve their own problems. Nobody thinks that you come from the Middle East, that you're brown and you're talking about the world. You can only talk about your experiences. But we're thinking globally. We started from the Middle East because everybody wanted us to talk about Israel, but Israel is not enough. And there is a roadmap, and we are going to succeed. And we already know that we are going to succeed because we already have succeeded in several things that are extremely important. And one of them is that I don't know how much you know about the relations within the Middle East. There is no trust. States do not recognize each other. As an Israeli, I can't talk to Arabs or to Iranians. They cannot talk to me. And yet, an organization led by an Iranian and an Israeli, and at the beginning, it was just a campaign in Israel, we managed to get to all the governments in the Middle East. We managed to show a solution, proposal solution to the governments in the Middle East. And actually now there's the Middle East conference, the UN conference on the Middle East that is using our materials as several proposals of several models for a regional solution. Now, it's great. 23 of the states are in the room. Israel is not there yet. But the shift that happened, that instead of the Arab states and Iran just talking about disarming Israel, now they're actually creating a regional solution that will allow all states to be on the same table and disarm together while feeling safe. And this is already groundbreaking, and I think that everyone that noticed what happened in that conference room came out not just optimistic, but that actually thought that miracles can happen. And if it was only once, you say, okay, it's an accident. But when it happens in 3 years, so it started in 2019, now we're in 22, and nothing has derailed this process yet, we understand that there is a chance, but we also are aware on how precious this is and how much guard it needs, how much tension and care it needs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you want to add anything to that? I mean, the UN conference. I mean, do you think that's gonna make a difference?
I was going to say that we hear a lot of bad news from the Middle East. So when something like what Sharon was talking about, which is a conference that is happening on an annual basis so you want to hear what is mandated? Let me just quickly go back a minute. So as Markus said, the issue of a WMD-free zone in the Middle East is decades old. They've been working on this for a long time, but there's been very little to show for it. As you can see, there's no WMD-free zone in the Middle East. And to make things even a little bit worse, there is no WMD-free zone anywhere in the world. Yes, we have nuclear weapons-free zones, which is, narrow to just nuclear weapons, but a WMD-free zone in the Middle East includes chemical weapons and biological weapons and their means of delivery. So imagine, in the Middle East, we're trying to achieve not just a nuclear weapons-free zone, but also across these other classes of weapons of mass destruction. Throughout this time, there's been some progress, ups and downs, but ultimately, in the past few years, we've seen more movement than we have seen across the whole history from the beginning of this issue from 1974 to today. And one of those major milestones is the Conference on Establishing WMD-Free Zone, which happens once a year in November in New York at the headquarters of the United Nations. Now, inside that room, so that we have we can imagine it. Ultimately, in the end of the day, there's going to be 24 countries that have to sign and ratify all the treaties that deal with disarmament and non-proliferation. That includes actually the TPNW, the Nuclear Ban Treaty, so current, past, and future disarmament treaties. From those 24 countries, they are then backed up by the P5. The P5 is the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, and then some international organizations, some civil society organizations. The METO, Middle East Treaty Organization, is one of the few that is actually there, and they have one mandate. This is the beauty of it. When you read the resolution that was passed at the UN General Assembly that established this annual conference, this is a very simple thing. It says, these countries from the region engage in good faith in negotiations to have a consensus-based, freely arrived. That means that they come together and they don't have an objection to the text. A text for a treaty to establish a zone. Now, remember that for a second. What does the Middle East Treaty Organization do at its core? What is the core product of what our organization does? We draft treaties. And one of the treaties that we are working on is how to establish a double MD-free zone in the Middle East. And this treaty goes through its own evolutions, changes, and we provide different modulations on what does verification look like? How do you actually dismantle the nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction in the region? How do we verify that nobody is cheating? How do we monitor the whole bloody thing? And how do we connect it to other instruments or mechanisms or treaties that are on the international level with some measures on a regional level that can then create that gap in trust and confidence that nations have missing in between them. So the process of achieving the zone in itself is incredibly important. So when it comes to a roadmap, we got it. Who's going to be inside this roadmap? We know. Is there some venue or forum where we can discuss this and negotiate this? Yes, it's in the UN every year until they get there. At the moment, as Sharon said, Israel is not there, but the seat is there. It's an empty seat. It's sitting there and it's got Israel in front of it. They can walk in whenever they want. Also, there's a seat for the United States. It's also empty. But guess what? 23 of those 24 countries are there. From the P5, 4 of them are there. So we can focus on the 2 that are missing or focus on the ones that are there.
And also the opportunity that they're not there.
Now, that's the best part. But don't tell the Americans and Israelis this, okay? But we're going to give you a little secret about this. And whoever's watching, I'm talking to you too, huh? Because it's consensus-based, everybody has to agree to all these texts and how we go about it. But if they're not in the room, they can't object to the text. So the idea is this. We get these governments, these diplomats, as quickly as possible to come far in having the text ready before the Americans and the Israelis realize that, hey, guess what? We didn't expect these Arabs and Iranians to actually get along, but damn it, they are. And we are hoping that they stay out of this a little bit longer. Because when the Americans are in the room, I don't know about you, but the Americans government, let me be specific, the American government and its very strong economic, political, military ties to the region and to some specific governments can influence how that language is then drafted. If they're not in the room, at least they can't obstruct it. And if they come in the room a bit too late, that would be nice because we've reached consensus on a lot of the material. And that's why we're in a race. That's why we work so hard to provide as many avenues, options, models that we do with these diplomats in their personal capacity and experts and advisors to draft this process of a treaty text that they can agree on as quickly as possible. And that is not like we say, hey, we've written it for you. No. We're just providing some options and recommendations. Take it, don't take it. Sharon and I and Meto, we don't put our branding all over it. No, maybe in the bottom we say, hello, this is by Meto. But we try to stay out of it. And we're very lucky. Leo is here. Leo and Sharon, these are the brains behind how to come up with this draft treaty and how we move forward with it. And the process is beautiful because it brings into a different parallel track from civil society, diplomats, governments, experts that usually don't even look into each other and recognize each other. But bringing them there and working on within civil society and how to come to these solutions is in itself building so much trust and confidence. And this is important because ultimately, who's going to sign these treaties are human beings behind these governments. And humans, like us, can be influenced, can be motivated, and can be provided a hope for what is the way forward and not to be stuck and always be going in reverse. So I hope that you feel, when it comes to a roadmap, we have more than a roadmap. We have an expansive highway, an autobahn, that is going to take us to where we're going to get to in the WMD-free zone in the Middle East.
This, Sharon, you mentioned it before and briefly already. So the forthcoming video conference of the NPT, there is a lot of doomsday scenarios. I'm always the advocate of the harmony, it seems, but it's okay.
Devil's advocate.
But what repercussions could this NPT review conference have for the Middle East?
So I'm sorry, it's going to be a kind of, I'm afraid, a long answer.
That's okay.
So cut me whenever it's too much.
Yeah.
In order to talk about what's going to be in this review conference, we have to go back to 1995 to visit for a second, take a time machine and go back to 1995. So when the NPT was established, it was only there for 25 years, right? From 70, it came into force in 70, and it was supposed to be for 25 years, and then we'll see. Now, just a brief between what is the difference between the TP and W that was here and the NPT. There's now a new treaty for the elimination of nuclear weapons, prohibition of nuclear weapons. No one is allowed to have them. Nuclear weapons are illegal. This is the new treaty. But not many states, it's a lot for a new treaty, but we don't have enough states there. And we definitely not have any of the nuclear possessors or the states that host nuclear weapons. The non-proliferation treaty is just what it is, non-proliferation. However, Article 6 of this, of the NPT, calls on the nuclear armed states to disarm. They actually have an obligation to disarm, which is why the NPT is still so important. I mean, we can say, okay, the NPT is obsolete, there's a new treaty by far better, but we still need them to hold to their obligation, Article 6 of the NPT. As I said, the NPT at the beginning was for 25 years, and in 1995, they needed to have a decision. Does the NPT ends or being prolonged?
Extended indefinitely.
Yeah. My English today is horrible. No sleep, no English. Now, as you know, all states are there. The NPT is not perfect, but thanks to the NPT, we are only talking about 9 nuclear states and not 100 nuclear states, or at least 40. 40 could have. So we do need the NPT, and at 95, in order to pass the resolution on the extension of the NPT, the states had to agree to a demand that they are calling for a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. And all the states said, okay, yeah, we're voting on that. Yes, we're going for a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. Now, there's a tiny, tiny problem in that decision. The tiny problem in that decision is that the states promised something that they could not give. A treaty, just because you have a treaty, doesn't mean that the treaty has any power on states that are not in the treaty, because treaty is only as strong as the states are in there and the way that they behave once they're there. The states in the room did not include Israel. When the Arab states and the non-aligned movement demanded a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East, they didn't really want to create a zone. They wanted to disarm Israel. Israel is not party to the NPT. So basically, in 95, a promise was made in order to have the NPT, and this promise was never in goodwill, not in good faith. They promise something they cannot deliver, and up till now, every 5 years, now 7 because of COVID, in the review conference, the NPT is in danger because a promise that they gave that was not in goodwill. And the reason that I keep saying goodwill is because we're still facing this issue. I started the campaign in Israel in 2007. Very old campaigner, but very fresh to the nuclear disarmament arena. I went to the NPT to learn, to see, and I realized that I can see every day for 1 month, at the NPT review conference, for example, you will have 1 or 2 panels on the Middle East. And all these panels were more like the same. Usually a group of white men, and I'm not racist, I'll say Western men, not women, not people from the Middle East, discussing the Middle East, and always, so I don't understand why every day we had to hear the same thing again, always the same format. Obstacles, obligations from the past, why it didn't work, and why it can't work, and that's it. Nobody never worked from this day forward. Just in all these panels, we couldn't hear any thoughts of the future, just the past and how dangerous it is and how impossible it is. We're going now to a new review conference. This review conference is taking place when actually there's already progress being on the ground. I mean, already we have the UN conference on the zone. Imagine if we didn't have this conference, imagine that the states in the Middle East feel obliged to go back to, you promised us to disarm Israel and nothing happened, and that's why we are no longer feel part to the NPT. And the reason I'm saying it is because it almost happened several times in the past, and there's a very big chance that it will happen again if there will be pressure on the Middle East. And here comes the most important component of METO and the reason that METO was established. And it will sound to you like a hippie talk. When we walked around international academics, experts, diplomats, and asked them what would be a good solution for the zone, and is it possible to have a treaty for a weapon of mass destruction-free zone in the Middle East, in the first 2 years, all we heard was, no, it's impossible. So why? Why are you fighting since 95, and actually since 1974, on something that you think is impossible? Why keep calling on something that you don't believe is possible? There's no goodwill in that. That is exploiting the Middle East. And in what way is the Middle East being exploited now? Remember what I said, why the NPT is still important? There's 5 nuclear armed states still in the NPT, and the pressure is getting on them now to get some kind of a timeline on when are you going to hold your obligation on Article 6, on the treaty that you are actually part. Israel is not. You are. What are you going to do? And with the new TPNW, the new treaty, the pressure on them is going to be even bigger, by far bigger. And they will have to deflect. And how do they deflect? Well, we just got a great example. In 2015, they didn't manage to get for a full month to any agreement. And in the last 2 days, US, UK, and Canada decided that in the last 2 days of a review conference, they have to solve the Middle East in 2 days. And of course, you can't solve the Middle East in 2 days, and therefore the NPT didn't make a final document, and it was all blamed on the Middle East. And when you blame things on the Middle East, the states in the Middle East, they need to answer, they need to react, and the reaction is not something that we want. This is dangerous. The other thing that is important with goodwill was that even though we heard that it is impossible to come up with a text that describes a WMD-free zone in the Middle East, we set a group of friends in the disarmament world and decided to just imagine for a second that they want to have a WMD-free zone in the Middle East. And in 3 months, we had the first draft of the first treaty for a WMD-free zone in the Middle East. We asked some British friends to send it around to all the Middle Eastern states, to the P5, to Israel, and what we heard was, wow, that is possible. The danger in the upcoming Middle East is that we will be used again. They won't reach agreement. The upcoming NPT is not going to reach probably any agreement because of Russia, Ukraine, because of the TPNW, and because there's going to be so much pressure on the P5. They can't blame it on the Middle East again. That's it.
There's always the same story. They're coming to my mind. So because I researched the NPT-related things and everything, and then I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I had a master's student working for me as a research assistant, and then I made her go through all kinds of documents and everything. She said, "This is really boring. This whole thing." I said, "Why is it boring?" She said, "Because it's always the same thing. So it's always Article 6. It's always the Middle East and things. So there's a lot.
Because they don't want to make progress.
And because there's this negotiating in good faith of Article 6 in particular. There's very little of that good faith. Yeah. Difficult question to you as well.
You're making our life
If one looks at these NPT review conference, the final documents, then oftentimes there was a linkage being made between nuclear weapons-free zone there, but I mean interpreted definitely also in terms of a weapons of mass destruction-free zone on the one hand, and a Middle East peace conference on the other. It was basically this notion, okay, so you really need to have a very broad-based regional peace process in order to move forward on the disarmament issue. First of all, do you agree with that? So then, because that would have to come then very much in addition to the UN conference, and if so, how could you conceive of setting something like that up?
Well, good question. Very easy, huh?
Yeah, I know.
I tell you what it is. There's a narrative that is not necessarily true, but it has become sort of the basis of conversation and discussion, that for the Israeli viewpoint, the Israeli government's viewpoint on disarmament and dismantlement, or even a conversation on its supposed nuclear weapons program, will only happen if there is peace in the region, right? Recognition, peace, and stability, and then once we have that, you can come and talk about these weapons of mass destruction. On the other side, the Arab countries and Iran say, well, let's get this armament done, and in the process, we will also automatically, in some way or form, tacit form, we will recognize you because we're going to deal with you in these negotiations, and then hopefully that will contribute to security and stability, and then hopefully that will spread into peace. So this idea of disarmament first or peace first has been going on for a long time. But in reality, it doesn't have to be this or that. It can be a combination. If we can make progress on stability, peace, and security in the Middle East, well, of course, it'll feed off into other issues of national security matters, including weapons of mass destruction, disarmament and dismantlement. So here is the trick. Another problem that we have in the Middle East. Unlike other regions of the world, there is no regional security apparatus. So you have the Shanghai Cooperation, you have OSCE, you have NATO, you have even the African Union has many mechanisms on dealing with conflict resolution, mediation, and so forth. But the one region where you would expect, for heaven's sake, to have some mechanism that addresses or reduces or predicts or tries to mitigate violent conflict and instability, well, guess what? There isn't one. So, not only are we trying to establish a WMD-free zone in the Middle East that deals with nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, we got to also work on creating a regional security apparatus that deals with these other matters that are also maybe conventional, in dealing with non-state actors, dealing with failed states, and so forth and so on. But the progress that we can make on one can contribute to the other. It can be complementary, what we're trying to say. And there are many discussions on the fact that actually, if we can make progress on the discussions that are now having a framework, such as the one that is called the November process or the November conference on the zone, by having all of these governments there, you think they're going to only just talk about WMDs? In the coffee breaks again, they're like, listen, Saudi Arabia and the Iranians, do you want to have a chat about what's going on in Yemen? Should we have a little conversation about maybe Libya? There is other ways for them to form relationships and conversations on the broader issues of regional security matters. So it doesn't have to be peace or disarmament and then peace. It can really work together. In addition to that, when you were talking about a peace conference, I'm not reading your mind, but I'm assuming that you're talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the need for some settlement or resolution on that issue, which obviously extends beyond just an issue between the Israelis and the Palestinians, because a lot of Arab countries or Islamic world will have their sort of say, and then there's obviously stakeholders or mediators such as the United States that are playing also a part in these discussions. By siloing that, maybe it would be helpful, but by actually working on these other parallel tracks on an array of issues and making sure that we don't view this through one specific lens of like, oh, just disarmament. We have to see that these are complementary, yet parallel and independent processes that can feed onto each other and be able to build that, what we have been talking about constantly, trust, confidence, and the political will to move forward. Now, when it comes to peace and disarmament, guess what? Wars don't come out of thin air, huh? You need the weapons. You need the means of war. Means of war include the fact that the Middle East is where the global largest exporters of conventional weapons are dumping their weapons on. Okay? So when we have America, the Russians, the French, the British, the P5, including the Chinese, talk about how they can contribute to peace and stability in the Middle East, I want to sit them down in a room and have a very polite conversation with them that, for heaven's sake, your largest market for your weapons is the Middle East. Half of the United States military exports. By the way, when I say United States, they are the largest exporters of weapons. Half of it goes to the Middle East. What do you expect when we are flooding the bloody region with weapons? What, they're going to play with it in the playground? No, they're going to shoot each other. At the same token, there's also issues that go beyond just the framing of peace. So there's a means of war. We have to provide means of peace. Means of peace means stop selling your weapons to our region. That means pressure inside those countries from those citizens. I can't come and tell the Americans don't sell weapons, but Americans can. And by the way, Austria, we love you, but you also have some things, we have some issues to pick with you too in terms of some of the military support and exports to the region. So the means of war have to be reduced. We have to give power to the means of peace, and that requires multilateralism, diplomacy, being able to contribute to economic and political development across the region, and to really put our hypocrisy that we see by global powers and call them out for it. But you cannot say peace when you're actually making war happen more conveniently. You cannot back one state or another because of your interest on energy security or other forms, and then go after another country extremely harshly. This can easily be seen when we see the case with Iran's nuclear program. The amount of sanctions and pressure on Iran after even the JCPOA was achieved. And now it's sitting on basically a life support in Vienna, which we hope they will restart trying to bring this Iranian nuclear deal into its full fruition. The plug was pulled by the Americans, by the Trump administration in 2018. And the responsibility should be on them. But yet Iran is still facing the sanctions, the isolation, sabotage, assassinations, and short of war. And yet, guess what? Do they have nuclear weapons? No. Imagine that, huh? So we have a long way to go. But to make it always a little bit more positive, this idea of that Israel's needs recognition, some form of relations with the rest of the region that will contribute for them to feel more confident and comfortable and secure in engaging in conversations that deal with disarmament and dismantlement has already begun. May that be through the Abraham Accords, that was the sort of like discussions now Israel has with the United Arab Emirates, with Oman, with Sudan, with Morocco, with Bahrain, which was really quite a watershed moment for the Israeli government in terms of its outreach or ability to openly engage with some of these Arab countries. So, if it's good or bad doesn't matter. We should take advantage of whatever comes in our way in terms of saying, hello, well, now you have these relationships. Let's hope that they become important enough for you to see value in engaging really more supportively, more constructively in these other forums that are dealing with a set of issues, including disarmament. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thanks a lot. I'm going to stop asking questions.
One
yes,
tiny thing to that.
yeah.
The question of the sequence, first peace or first disarmament, is again, like most of the things, lack of goodwill. Because both peace and disarmament provide the same thing at the end. So when you say, no, this should come first, basically it's when you're not ready to talk. Because it's one thing to say first we need to have peace, but then do nothing about this peace. The Arab Peace Initiative, by the way, one pager, that's it. The Arab Peace Initiative says that for three core issues between Israelis and Palestinians, and these three core issues are negotiable, I mean, even in this language of this Arab Peace Initiative, everything is suggested. So it needs to be agreed upon solution. For agreed upon solution for the three issues, they call for the end of conflict, not peace. End of conflict and normalization, something that we don't have between Israel and not even Egypt or Jordan. We do not have it. This is what the Arab world has offered. Now, if we wanted to, that would be a great opportunity forward. So when there's a lack of will, there's always excuses. When they say that these are the conditions, and when they go to technicalities of why it can happen, you know that they don't want to. When the technicalities are being thrown aside to sit together around a table to find solutions, then when you know that they want to achieve it. But when, as civil society, you get caught up in all the little technology things, like, no, this needs to be in this kind of a room, or we cannot sit in this arena because it needs to be UN headquarters, and there cannot be, then you know that the states don't want it. If they want it, they sit and they talk. So if we start to work on those technical issues and getting happy because now we know as much as they do, and we're kind of a competition with the states of who speaks more technically, we lose. When we totally ignore, really ignore all the little problems thrown at us and go directly to the solution, offer it to them and invite them, and not willing to be caught up in those technicalities, then we might have a win. But for that, you have to be very sure of what it is that you want to achieve.
Thank you. You have sat there patiently and quietly for a while. Let's open up things for discussion. So whoever wants to ask a question, feel free to ask. And I'm always going to bundle 3 questions in one. And then Vicky can maybe go.
I have really a psychological question. So how do you motivate countries who do not want for various reasons? Or how do you trick them in? And if you trick them in, it's not really wanting, and that's how they will kind of again turn. So yeah, that's it.
I'll be very happy to.
Yeah, thank you.
Excuse me, I have some question. Can you relate, when I hear you talking, I have the feeling as if Yuri Avinadi once more he's resurrected in a way.
Sorry.
But in nuclear thing, are you in this message? Because I come from the Middle East. I never heard about the Middle East Treaty Organization. This is in the Arab world. You have, you have some partner or no?
Oh, yes, we do.
Where are you from?
I'm Palestinian, actually, from
Fantastic. We will definitely talk about it. We have a lot of our friends inside. We have a lot of partners actually in the region. And we can.
this one. And second, when you speak about the Arab world as if it is a unity, actually, now for this, the Israeli counterpart, I mean, the Arab world is the best to achieve this because it's not united. We are not speaking about Iran and Arab as if they are together. Actually, they are not at all together. There are more than some of them. They are with Israel more than they are with Arab between each other. And the Palestinian and Israeli conflict now it's not anymore on the table, unfortunately. It is not. I mean, you managed. It is gone in a way. I don't know who is there to blame, but fourth, in the 1986, you have the Valun, I remember here. He was just a whistleblower, and he was put in jail for long life in jail just because he was a whistleblower. So how come that you, I mean, in your case, you are pointing about Israel, that they are, they have a nuclear weapon, and they don't. They say, no, we don't have. So how you want to put somebody to negotiate with, and till now they are denying. They say they don't have weapon of mass destruction.
They use a very funny term. What is the term that they use?
We'll get there, but
Yeah, I'm gonna get the thing.
Thank you so much. These are good
Thank you.
questions.
And then I think I neglected this side. Any questions from that side? Yes.
What do you guys see as the role of non-nuclear middle powers in promoting the Meta Treaty?
Such as Canada?
Sharon, maybe you're gonna answer wherever something comes to your mind. You don't have to
Okay.
answer all of them.
So great question. Actually, the how. We've been working as I said, when we come into the UN, I know that it seems like you come into the UN, you want to see the big room where everything happens. But when we're going to the UN, for us, the main room is just a place where we can catch the representatives of the governments. Now, you said, sir, that you didn't hear about us. If you would have heard about us prior to 2017 or 18, actually, then it means that we've done a very bad job. When you're trying to do something like this, you don't want people to know about you. And when you're working as, with people, as an Israeli, with an Iranian, and other people from the Middle East, it's very healthy that you don't hear about us. Healthy for us, healthy for the governments that are talking to us. The good and the bad thing in our work is that we're working in a place where democracy is lacking. So we're talking about 23 states, that if you talk to the governments, it's enough, or almost enough, to the governments, to the think tanks, to those who actually talk about these things. And when it comes to Israel, that does have a little bit, not by far more democratic procedures, you still need to talk to a small group of people because of ambiguity, and if we'll have time we talk about it, nobody in Israel actually know how to talk about these topics, apart from the government, some of them, and the think tanks. So it was, in one way, when you look at the Middle East, you think, how do we talk to them? But then we see them all in one room in the UN. And that's the great place to catch them and talk to them. So we're actually catching them and talking to them since 2008. And in 2016, I think, we sent them all copies of a first draft. But as I said, we gave up on ego. So it wasn't us sending them, it was BASIC, British American Institute, that was sending it to all of them. And because when you give up on your ego, you can actually talk to people in a much easier way. The thing was that because there was no goodwill from no side in the room, not from the Arabs, not from the Iranians, and not from Israel, everybody felt comfortable because it gives the Arabs an opportunity to always be right and bash Israel on one more thing. Israel is not coming, Israel doesn't want to talk, and Israel is feeling comfortable not talking because it has its, it gives a clean pass of not talking at all, and definitely not talking inside Israel. And you have Iran that also, just like Israel, is from the other side of the Arab world, the adversary, Everybody has something small to win from this situation, definitely not going to change it. But they keep saying that they want it changed. So they're kind of bluffing. And when we did the first draft treaty, one representative was saying, you're actually trying to call us on our bluff. And my answer was, of course, because then you have to uphold it. But it's not just by pushing them. It was by actually showing them different solutions and asking them to consider it, but also in a very big events at the UN, when we can talk to all of them at the same time, to ask them to show goodwill, and that they cannot now, because we already showed three different models, they cannot say that it's impossible anymore. It's just impossible. And I have to say that the biggest how was in Zurich. In Zurich, we managed to invite, with the help of a rich organization, diplomats and ex-diplomats and some think tankers from around the Middle East. After a long time promising them and creating confidence on the personal level with them, that nobody will know who was in the room, not just what was said, but who was in the room. And that's what I said, why I said, if you would have heard us, we would have done a very bad job. People knew about us giving lectures, giving speeches at the UN, but they didn't know who we're doing it with. And these people were invited to work and make our very drafty, bad draft treaty into a better one. We never gave them a solution. We gave them some ideas that they can make better. And in that room, on the first day, we knew that the only thing that they want to talk about is the one thing that they're used to talk about, and that's the obstacles. So, because you said psychologically, question, we told them we have 3 days, let's put all the obstacles on one big paper, so at the last day, we can go back and see if we solved all the obstacles. We had one session on all the obstacles. All the obstacles were there on the paper. And then we went back, and then we went to the text, and they argued the text, but they were arguing possibilities for the first time. This might work, this will not work, this you should do better. They're much smarter than me. They have much more experience. All we needed to do was to ask them to turn this to make our draft treaty better. They're very comfortable. They were very comfortable doing that. And by the third day, we promised we'll go back to talk about the obstacles. And the last session, on the last part of the annex, on the last annex, and we said, okay, we will reconvene for the session on the obstacles, and the people around the desk saying, and we're talking about 30 people, most of them very long-time diplomats, saying, actually, we don't want to talk about the obstacles. We want to talk how to take this forward and how to protect this process. And that was groundbreaking. That's when we knew that we made a difference. Now, very, very quickly, you're totally right. The 23 states sitting in this room, the Arab states and Iran, have no agreement between them on most things, which is why it's such a precious process, which is why it's a groundbreaking process. Vanunu was arrested. I'm answering quickly. Vanunu was a whistleblower. He was arrested because they had a reason to arrest him, because he was working in the reactor. He was part of the secret. He was part of that. He signed all these documents, and then he told the secret, and that gave them a reason to arrest him. But the way that they've done it was to make sure that ambiguity remains in Israel. And ambiguity, you have to realize, is only inside Israel. Nobody, and Israel never said that they are denying having nuclear weapons. Israel never denied, because Israel would like you to know that we have nuclear weapons. We would like you to know it, so you treat us as a nuclear weapon state. But we didn't want the US to not being able to sell us arms, even though we're nuclear arms states. So ambiguity was actually in order to make the Americans comfortable. However, don't tell it to the Israelis, because for some reason, they managed to tell us that talking about nuclear weapons put us in danger. They didn't tell us that everybody else in the world knows that we have nuclear weapons. Trust me, when I went to the NPT for the first time, I was sitting there, all the governments were talking about our weapons of mass destruction, and I was like, really? They all know? Because in Israel, you kind of believe that we manage, but why is it? Why is it that ambiguity only exists in Israel? Because then there's no conversation inside Israel. So we're not talking about, do we need these weapons? When we're talking about Iran, of course, Iran is going to have a weapon and immediately they'll bomb us and nobody's questioning it because our reporters don't know how to ask questions. And that's why the same reporters that criticize everything that Netanyahu says, couldn't criticize anything he said about Iran, they just don't know how to. And that's the reason for ambiguity. We have the oldest reactor in the world still operating with no safeguards on it, but we don't know how to talk about it. And this is why the secrecy is there. And the role of states from outside the zone, and it doesn't matter if it's a state so tiny that it only had 100,000 people or 50 billion people, they still have the same vote at the UN. They need to acknowledge what's going on in the Middle East. They need to acknowledge that the promise, the ill will promise of 95 is actually being taken care of now, and they cannot use it again in order to derail. They cannot derail the Middle East. They cannot use the Middle East again. They have to protect this process, offer help to this process. They can, and they need to put it in their statements. So it is in the UN documentary that there is a process. Thanks.
Thank you. Wonderful, Sharon. You didn't leave anything for me. Okay, wait.
I trust that you will.
Just let's start off with the motivations for the regional countries. Motivations are important, am I right? Or we don't do anything. So not only motivations, but motivations backed by incentives. So the idea is that if we have a WMD-free zone in the Middle East, what would that look like and what would that contribute to each of the national interest of the 24 countries that are going to eventually be part of the zone? So it's very important not just to talk about, oh, you got to make this zone a reality, but then what actually benefit will it come from having this established? And when we speak to some of these governments, these motivations can range. These incentives can have to be tailored and customized. That if, for example, we engage in these conversations, that your bilateral relationships with your neighboring countries can improve, because then this allows for an integration of a key national security issue that now you can cooperate on, such as the WMD disarmament agenda. Secondly, it also releases a lot of the treasury and the capital, both human and financial, that is going towards this state of instability and insecurity, while actually behind the door, or actually already in the room, you're having massive water shortages that are coming up, environmental impacts that are going to be very, very severe and very fast in the coming years. So we're talking about internally displaced people, refugees, so forth. You name the problem, the Middle East has it. So when we incentivize these governments, we say that by establishing this thing, well, hopefully we can take these crazy weapons out of the equation, but by doing so, we can open up the space to have a conversation on these other important matters that are also necessary to work on and cooperate on. So incentivization is extremely key. It also prestige for the governments. So engaging on such an important issue and making progress on it also makes them look on the international arena in a better light. So we capitalize on that as well. So that's on the incentives. And it can go into much broader, economic, political, social, it can go across the board. When it comes to Meta, and thank you so much for the comments and questions that came on this from this side of the room. You're right, the Arab world is not united. Are you kidding me? You put 3 Arabs in a room and they will have 17 different opinions. You put 3 Israelis in a room and the same situation. What was this joke about the one Israeli found himself on a abandoned deserted island, and he built 2 synagogues, the one that he will go to and the one that he does not like.
That he will never set foot in.
He will never set foot in. So, and I'm not even getting to the Iranians just for the sake of time. But we will all have our own problems too, you know. So there is a lot of division amongst the region. And so, again, the zone or a move towards the zone hopefully will contribute to some type of agreement. Ironically and surprisingly, on paper, all governments in the region support the zone.
Including Israel.
Including Israel, on paper. Have you heard of anything that we agree on? I mean, even within Palestine, it will be a very different story. Even if we go to Lebanon, you go across, even within the countries, we don't agree on major issues. No, your hummus is better than my hummus. You know, it gets really crazy. So keeping that in mind, the idea that we can actually have consensus on something as key as WMDs is one of the reasons why we engaged in this. Because we looked at other issues, human rights, issues of, conventional security matters. We went across all of this and wait a minute, there is no consensus on this. But this one, maybe because they thought that it would never happen, but it's an important issue to bash Israel, for example, on, or just to look like we are united on this issue, they agree to have, on paper, pass resolutions after resolutions and endorse it every year. So we're taking advantage of that. And when we're talking about negotiations, also let's make two quick distinctions. You have individual Arab countries, and don't think that we're just pooling all the Arabs together. But in this issue, the League of Arab States represents all those 22 Arab countries. And they do play an important part in these negotiations. So they actually usually work amongst themselves as within the Arab League, and they come to consensus on how they move forward. So that is why we usually see it in this sort of like Israelis, Iranians, and the Arabs, because they usually have some consensus that they work on internally on. All right, on Israel's nuclear weapons. Everybody...
What?
On alleged Israeli nuclear weapons program. The official line is, we do not confirm or deny that we have nuclear weapons. And so it's very useful sometimes to say that, hey, we don't have nukes, and sometimes to say, by the way, we may have it. So wink, wink. It's important for actually a few reasons. Now, Sharon has mentioned some of them, but another one is that it is a tough sell, maybe not now or in near future, but in the early stages, because remember, Israeli nuclear weapons program dates back to the 60s. This was when, was quite soon after the Second World War and the establishment of Israel. So there was a societal history and memory of what happened through the Holocaust. That any form of mass killing or the means of mass killing is very taboo. So even the issue of nuclear weapons, to be able to just be openly there, can be a major issue because it's something that can really hit the hearts and memories of a people that have gone through such mass, basically, killings, indiscriminate killings. So there's also that level of knowing that that's also there somewhere in the psychology. But we know that they've got it. And we know not just about it because of Vananunu and whistleblowers. We have much better technologies, and the French, who provided them the reprocessing facilities underneath deep in Dimona, well, the Frenchies can't keep secrets, you know that. So that has been, openly leaked as well. And we have other ways of going about it. The US itself, the US intelligence community, because what is known as the Freedom of Information Act, allows for researchers, such as my colleagues previously at Princeton University, who went and forced the US government to release a lot of documents that, again, showcases the conversations the US government was having with the Israelis, saying, all right, we didn't see that when you took those designs. And by the way, we realized that the paint on that wall was very new, and we knew that there was something else behind that wall, but hey, we just let it be. So we actually have documents that say that we know that you know that we know that you got the nukes. And we know that the Frenchies helped too, and we know that the others, the Norwegians, can you believe that Norwegians helped the Israeli government build their nuclear weapons program? The South Africans helped in some shape and form. The Americans turned a blind eye and provided plans and designs. There's too many people, too many cooks, what does it say? Too many chefs in the kitchen. And so somebody talks. So Vanunu is just one indicator, but there's a lot out there. And if you want to find out more, let me plug in my book. There's a book that I wrote with Ambassador Mousavian on weapons of mass destruction, free zone in the Middle East, and the chapter on Israel went through 16 different reviews. 16 different reviews. And this is why I'm talking with a bit of frustration, because I had to source every line in that chapter. Not once, 3 times. All right. Now, about these other promising governments that can support the zone. May they be non-nuclear middle powers, or as Sharon said, the other 190 countries that are part of the NPT. Now, the collective power of individual states, when we put them together, can be incredibly powerful. And that is why a treaty like the TPNW has made the nuclear weapon states so angry. Because when it was negotiated in New York, Sharon, myself, and a lot of our colleagues at the Middle East Treaty Organization were also there when this was negotiated. And then, the NATO states were outside the room really angry. The nuclear weapon states arm twisting this government not even engage in this. But ultimately, the TPNW became a reality because these non-nuclear middle, small, large powers realized that they, as a collective, they have the power. And this is where, Markus, I want hopefully for you to become a little bit more optimistic, because your government, the Austrians, were instrumental in that. Countries like New Zealand, some people don't even know where New Zealand is. Sometimes when I see the world map, the New Zealand is missing, and that can be very problematic for the Kiwis. I mean, the New Zealanders always point out, this is the world map, why did you forget New Zealand? Australia's there. They are at the forefront of nuclear disarmament. Other countries that have faced some form or have been impacted by nuclear testing, by colonial powers such as the French or Algeria, they are at the forefront of this. The victims of the nuclear testing during the Soviet Union era in Kazakhstan are at the forefront of this movement.
And uranium mining now.
And the uranium mining in the Congo. And we can go through the list because nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction are called that because they're indiscriminate and they're destructive across the board on our societies, on our environments and ecosystems. So it really makes an impact. The Hibakusha, which are the survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, the only ones that we have in history done by the United States, are really the witnesses and the voices that need to be given as much power as possible because they know what that reality looks like. And we have found within our work at the Middle East Treaty Organization, within our projects, one that goes and examines a similar sort of path on the survivors of chemical weapons use, on the nuclear testing survivors in Algeria, and the uranium mining. Because those voices will be able to, for us, to not only hear it, but to visualize it, and then have the empathy to then absorb it and feel what that means if it happens to us. Because these weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons specifically, don't forget they are man-made. Some engineers and scientists, and we can undo that. If we have built it, we can unbuild it. And you know what? We know how to do it because the South Africans did it. I'm also partly South African. And South Africa is the great example of a nuclear weapon state under apartheid South Africa that then went through dismantling it for many reasons. One, that they were so fearful that once apartheid collapses, you will have a black South African government with nuclear weapons. That was motivation. That was their motivation for disarmament and dismantlement. For each of those 9 nuclear weapon states, we got to find what will motivate them, who will incentivize them to get rid of their nukes. May that be because they're worried that, one other group that they are discriminating against will have the nukes? Or is it because that the Russians and the Americans reach a point where both governments will have 22 minutes to decide if that projectile that is coming towards them has a nuclear warhead on it or not? And do they press the button that will destroy each other? And as Sharon said, Even if it's India and Pakistan, we're totally screwed. So imagine when Russia and the United States go at it. So we can do it. We have already done it in many places. And so every country, from Costa Rica to Brazil, even the Italians to some extent, even though they also have some nukes by NATO, each of those governments and countries have civil society, huh? There's people in there. So we can go from the grassroots and we can go from the highest levels to find every pressure point we can and then exploit it. Because they have been exploiting us. They've been taking us hostage. So if they can do it to us, amen, we can do it to them. But we got to identify those ways. And that's where the Middle East Treaty Organization, in all of those fronts, may that be citizen diplomacy, advocacy, education and capacity building, the draft treaty process that includes very quiet diplomacy on the side, and social media, campaigns, and so forth, that we can get all of this message to every stakeholder and tailor it to those stakeholders, from government to people. That's how we do our work.
Thanks a lot. I think we can stop the official part here, and then outside there's going to be coffee and cake, and then we can continue the conversation. And there's always in Vienna, there's always coffee. There's always coffee. Yes.
Which, by the way, came from our region. Huh? Let me just remind you that your fancy coffee also comes from the Orient.
One thing perhaps, I mean, that for me has been, I mean, because you opened up a bit and you ended the official part, that is basically the issue of knowledge. Yeah? So when one thinks about nuclear matters, then the dominant knowledge, and I would say unfortunately, sort of the dominant knowledge that can be basically traced back to the 1950s, the Rand Corporation, yeah, because everything is deterrence. Yeah, and I think where the humanitarian initiative really made a huge impact there is changing that around, yeah. And so looking at human security, looking at the humanitarian impact of weapons of mass destruction, and in that way, I think this whole movement has really come a long way. And thanks a lot for being here today, all of you,
for having us.
And keep going strong, yeah, because so both of it, the humanitarian initiative in general, and applying it to the Middle East in particular is really very, very, very important. So
Markus, thank you too. Huh? Yeah. This was organized in such an effective, and Markus is German, and he was really like, I have never seen a most fast way to do this. So we want to thank you for trusting us with our message that we wanted to bring, and for hosting us in this beautiful city of Vienna. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.